To the third module for EDM511, and today we're going to be looking at critical theory. And so what our goals today are going to be, we're going to be understanding, get an overview of what literary theory is, and we're going to explain how that theory is kind of embedded in the philosophy of Karl Marx and the Marxist views, and then you're going to be asked to analyze a video using that critical lens that you're assigned. So before we do anything, the reading that you've been doing for the last 2 weeks talks about looking at adolescence through a critical lens. And so I want to talk about what a lens and why is it important when you're teaching adolescence literature. It's important to consider something like a lens. So books have so many truths to them and so many ways that they can be looked at. They can be looked at from just purely from an art, point of aesthetics, how well it is written, character development, political stances, that you can, when you are a teacher, one of the things that you want to think about is, what is the focus that I want my students to have? Because you want to have a shared experience. Part of the reason why you might have a large group read in a class is to have the shared experience. And so one of the things that you might do with when you're assigning a work is kind of define what the lens is that you and your class are going to explore this work in. And so as we know, lenses make things look differently. If I look at the same picture outside in my backyard with a wide lens versus a close-up lens, they're going to distort. What I see is going to be very, very different. And so that's one of the things that we're going to do is when we are using a critical lens, we're trying to identify what we want our readers to see as they're experiencing this novel. Literary criticism really is not something that is new. It's really been around for most of modern literature. Really, when you think about it, we talk about the different types of criticism, and you may have been taught these not so much as a literacy lens, but about things like you might have been taught romanticism when you were when in high school you read, say, Frankenstein. And so what I kind of want to go through is sort of the major types of lenses that that English that the English literature can produce or can be looked through. Not just English, I'm sorry, but that literature can be produced or looked through. The first thing that you think about, and you might know this, which was the Romantics, and that was really 19th century literature. And those things looked at this idea that we wanted to look at a work in terms of who influenced it, who the author was, what what allusions and historical context they are talking about. And it was rooted in this belief that there's a canon, that there are books that all educated people should read, and it really questioned what the purpose of literature is. It's this idea of trying to explore our human condition. So that was really popular in the 19th century, and that's really how a lot of academics looked at literature in the 19th century. As we moved into the end of the 19th, into really solidly into the Industrial Revolution, we started looking at a more scientific approach to literature. And so the idea of formalism took root. So we're talking about the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. And really what formalism was looking at is trying to understand, like, how does a good piece of literature function? What does it look like? And so it would try to be more scientific in its approach. It would look at plot devices. It would look at language devices, things like that. And so it really wanted to look at the function of literature and the artistic decisions made by the writer. So, that really took root when we were trying to basically come up with what makes good literature. And so there was, as we moved into the 20th century and we started taking a more modernist approach and we became more comfortable with less structure, we moved into what we would call new criticism. And new criticism was just saying that rather than looking at they looked at the same ideas, but rather than looking at it and trying to compare from text to text, like getting these universal ideas, new criticism just kind of said, let's just look at each text in and of itself. So we no longer look to see anything about the author, anything about the time period, anything about the historical context of or the intended audience. Let's just look at the text itself. And what happened then is we started to move into some theories that began to say, okay, but when I look at that text, what should I be looking at that text about? And so the Marxist literary theories emerged out of that new criticism belief that we're just going to look at the text. We're just going to look at the text in terms of what happens in the text, and we're going to look at that text very carefully. There are two others that are important for you to know, but we're not going to really follow because this class isn't really about literary lenses or critical lenses, but I just wanted to let you know, and we're going to use one lens as a way to kind of like have a way in, a shared experience with a text. And so structuralism and post-structuralism were more modern theories that really were looking at at the texts in a broader sense and looking for things that are a little bit more universal. Okay, so before we do anything, I'm telling you that we're going to look at critical lenses. So we're just going to look at critical lenses, but I want you to understand that critical lenses really come out of the work of Karl Marx. And while I know most of us probably know who Marx is, I'm going to show this very quick video that is an overview of Marx.
Karl Heinrich Marx, the father of Marxism, was born on May 5, 1818, in the Kingdom of Prussia, part of the German Confederation.
His grandfathers on both sides came from lines of famous rabbis, but his own father had converted to Protestantism, given the barriers to Jewish involvement in society as full citizens.
In 1835, Marx left home to attend the university, where he became fascinated with the teachings of German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel.
He had a full and exciting life, but was captivated by these big ideas coming from Hegel about what determined the path of a society of human civilization.
Between 1843 and 1845, Karl Marx forged two relationships that changed the course of his life.
One was to his wife, Jenny von Westphalen, who came from the Prussian aristocracy, a happy marriage, 7 children. And the other was his intellectual bonding with Friedrich Engels, who brought to the relationship a set of experiences and knowledge that really opened Marx's eyes to new approaches.
In 1848, Marx and Engels laid out their concept of socialism in their most famous work, the Communist Manifesto. In their writings, they championed the worker and advocated a classless society that dissolved bonds between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
The Communist Manifesto is not only Marx maturing from a philosopher and economist into a revolutionary and an activist, it's also remarkably well-timed. The ink was barely dry when a wave of revolution swept all over Europe. He was seen as so seditious that he couldn't find a home anywhere in continental Europe, and therefore exiled to London.
In London, Karl took a job as a European correspondent to the New York Tribune.
Writing for the American market, he naturally had to turn his attention to American politics to an extent. The crisis over slavery, the abolitionist movement, and ultimately the Civil War.
Marx went on to write economic and political works, including Das Kapital. In 1864, Marx was elected to the General Council of the International Workingmen's Association, where he fought against capitalism as well as the anarchist wing of the organization.
In his travels in Europe and in the United States, he had an international perspective on things. He had a worldwide view, a very, very wide aperture.
By the early 20th century, Marx's theories became increasingly popular and were adopted by different countries. The Russian Revolution of 1917 ushered in the first communist government, and after World War II, socialism and communism spread to countries throughout Europe, Asia, and Latin America.
I think that communism appealed because it provided such a contrast with the existing economic situation.
Whether he foresaw it or not, his impact on revolutionary movements from Russia to China to Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea has been immense. They all base their legitimacy and their program on Marxism.
Karl Marx died of illness on March 14, 1883, and is buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. On his tombstone is inscribed the final line of the Communist Manifesto: "Workers of all lands unite."
Okay, So that's kind of an overview of Karl Marx, and it's important for us to understand that when we talk about a Marxist literary lens, we're really not looking at a political. It's not that it's looking at it from a political lens, but there are some ideas from Marx that get pulled out and applied to, well, what would it look like to use Marx's understanding of the world and understanding of power and power distribution? What would that look like if we were to apply that to a totally different field, not economics, not politics? And what we come up with are some really important sort of views of literature that come out of the Marx tradition. The first one is Marxist, which I'll go over in a minute. The other one are feminist. Then there's genderqueer theory, race, and post-colonialism, okay? So in all of those, what you're looking for, there's some Marxist terms, okay? Hegemony and capital. Those are the two things that we talk about. Hegemony is leadership or dominance over others, and what gives one person leadership or dominance over the other. And what that is capital, which is the source of wealth. And in Marxism, that means actual money. But for others, that might be cultural capital, such as maleness, whiteness, heterosexuality, things like that. So Marxist criticism is not merely a sociology of literature concerned with how the novel gets published and whether they mention the working class. It really aims to explain the literary work more fully. What is it trying to explain about relationships? What is it trying to explain about power? What is it trying to explain about what disempowers some people over others? And anytime you have a look, anytime you're looking at a work of literature through a Marxist lens, it's important to understand that you are only looking at part of that literature, and you're only looking at the things that come into your lens. If I have a close-up lens, I'm only looking at, I'm in my yard, I'm taking a picture of a tree, I use a close-up lens. I'm not seeing the whole tree, I'm seeing only those things that come into view through my lens, and that's important to understand. With anytime you're putting on a literary lens, there are things that you're going to look at, and there are things that you're going to let go of. And that means that there's no one lens that is absolutely, totally complete in its analysis of a work. And it also means that for you as a teacher, it helps you because it helps you to focus. There's so much you could look at in a complex work of literature, like most of the young adult literature that we're going to be reading, that it allows you to say, okay, we're only going to look at this aspect of it. And it helps to focus, and that helps readers a lot, especially adolescent readers who are sometimes overwhelmed with there's so much to talk about, there's so much going on in this work. It allows that narrowing of the vision, okay? So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at what when you have your assignment, you're going to be given one of these Marxist approaches to analyze what's happening in a very short video, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to look at the dominance. Who dominates over others? What constitutes leadership in this community or society? And then what is the source of wealth? Or that is, what is the source of power? So for some of you are going to be looking at actual wealth when you have the Marxist. But for others, you might be looking at whiteness or dominant culture or race, or maybe you're looking at it from the terms of heterosexuality versus homosexuality. Post-colonialism is that you come from a dominant culture. So if I am reading a post-colonial work, I'm going to look to see what culture is emphasized over another, and generally that culture is the colonizing culture, right? So you think about it in society, it's the colonizing culture that is presented as better than, say, a developing country, so a Western country versus an African country. It would be appropriate to look at a work of literature from South Africa or from the United States, or from Africa, to see its depiction of the United States or maybe Europe, okay? So in this particular video that I'm going to have you watch, you're going to be assigned these are the appropriate lenses. You can look at it from either a Marxist view, what is the film saying about class, how do you know? From a feminist view, what is the film saying about women and power in society, how do you know? Or race, what is the film saying about race and society and how do you know? Because these are three lenses that would be appropriately applied to the video that you're going to be linked to, okay? So what you're going to do then is you're going to, you're assigned a lens based on your birthday. So I don't really know whose birthday is what. So you just, you can look at this based on your birthday. That's the lens that you're going to do. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to watch a short video. And in this short video, I'm going to ask you to analyze what's going on, answer that essential question that's in parentheses there, in looking at just your lens. And then you're going to respond to people who looked at the other lens. You're going to respond to their posts, okay? And so what I'm going to have to ask you to do right now is to stop the video at this point, because I used to embed the video in this lecture, but because it is a copyrighted, it keeps getting pulled from YouTube. So I will send you, there's going to be a link to this particular video. And this video is going to be what you're going to watch. It's a short animated video called Zero. And when you watch Zero, you're going to watch it with the assigned lens, and then you're going to go to Leo and you're going to respond to the post, okay? I'll just give you sort of a wrap up, and then you can finish, you can stop the video and watch and finish up for the week. But so the connection to our course here, one of the things when you were looking at the critical youth lens, looking at adolescence from the critical youth lens, is the question that it's really asking you is, what is this work of literature saying about youth, and how do you know? And that's really an engaging and important conversation for our students to have, particularly because it's traditional for the younger generation to be somewhat misunderstood, and for there to be generation gaps. That is something that we've seen throughout history. Things change. The generation of youth is usually on the cusp of that change, so therefore there is this like pushback against that. And so this is something that really can engage your students, and it helps them to see what power they have and in what ways they are disempowered by society, which is a powerful conversation for adolescents to have. So when you're thinking about this critical lens, one of the critical lenses that the authors have been arguing we can add would be this youth lens. So when you have Marxist, feminist, race, the Marxist lens, the feminist lens, or the race lens, there's also this idea that you can also put in this youth lens. Okay. So at this point, you're going to be looking at the theme of coming of age, and there is a list on Leo for you to pick from, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to read that list, or that book. You're going to pick a book from that list and read that book. You're going to use the video feedback to revise your personal narrative this week. Add an informal letter to me where you tell me what you did to revise it based on your feedback. If you have not already done the post on the animated video, by the time you're listening to this, some of you may have stopped and come back to this. Some of you may are just working right through. So the next thing you would need to do would be to go and do your post on Zero and respond to the post of at least 2 other classmates. And then you're going to make your selection for read 1, and you're going to begin reading. The novel and the vlog for the first reading will be due at the end of the 4th module. If you look on Leo, you can see all the directions for that. Okay, well, thank you. And as always, make sure that you email me with any questions.